Hello, good afternoon. My name is Courtney, and I am talking to you here from the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. I am joined by my friend Sophie, and we want to thank you so much for joining us for our Aquarium Online Academy. So today we're going to talk about some cool fish, learn a lot about them. If you want to join in this conversation more actively and tell us things that you know, questions you have, some observations, please do that. We love to get that. And you can do that by texting us at 562-286-1838. If you're watching this a little bit later on, or you just want to finish before you ask any questions, you can also email us at live@lbaop.org. So that's live@lbaop.org. Kiddos, if you are watching this, do make sure you check in with an adult before you text us or anything. But again, the more you talk to us and communicate with us, the more we can tailor this program to you. So we always love to hear from you. So like I said, we're going to be talking a little bit about fish today. And as I'm sure you can see behind me, there are plenty of fish. So the first thing we're going to try and do is practice a scientist skill we're going to use throughout our time here together, and that is using observations. So I'm going to step to the side, and what I'd like you to do is to try to make an observation, and that is just anything you notice. So anything you notice can be an observation. When you are somewhere out in nature, you might be able to feel and smell things, but here over video, we're only able to see things. So what I'd like you to do to make this observation is just notice what you see. So it could be something about the animals here. It could be something about the kind of exhibit they're in. This is actually one of our exhibits here at the aquarium. Maybe about how they're moving, size of their body, color of it. So what are some observations we've made so far? I see Sophie writing something, which makes me think that maybe one of you has chosen to share an observation with me. That would be so amazing. One thing I observe is our turtle over here is getting out of the camera. But I bring up that turtle because that is kind of one of the stars of this webcam. If you, after today, want to continue to see what these animals are doing just in your day-to-day life, you can always bring up our webcams and see what some of our animals and our exhibits are doing. And that turtle in Shark Lagoon, this exhibit, is one of the animals that likes to get right up into the camera. So it's really not shy at all, loves to get in the limelight. Another thing I noticed is there's lots of different kinds of fish here. We have sharks. We have lots of other smaller fish. I also noticed we switched to a highlight reel. Oh, and I also see that we are again joined by Julian, Carter, and Tyler. Thanks for joining us again. And as I was just mentioning, you can see that turtle, as I was describing earlier, loves to get right up in the camera. It might be checking the surface of the water right now. So, as I mentioned, there's lots of fish here. And today we are going to talk a little bit about fish. So let's start by asking ourselves, what makes a fish a fish? Because there's lots of animals that live in the ocean, right? But are they all fish? What's that turtle? Well, the turtle is a reptile like a snake or a lizard. Let's see. I see some fish here. I see a fish there. I see some sharks. Do we think those sharks could be fish? Well, let's figure out those traits that a fish has and see if they apply to sharks too, or any other animals we can think of. So, let's see, how about these fish right here? They're all living in water. Now, if you or I tried to live in water, that would not go so well for us. But how can our fish live in water and still breathe? Do we know what allows them to breathe in water? I wonder if we have a close-up of a fish, or if we can... Oh, perfect. How about this thing right here? Yeah, so that is their gills. As you can see here on this Garibaldi, this is actually California's marine state fish. And we have a beautiful picture of its gills. So gills are one thing that all fish have. And that, like I said, allows them to breathe in water. Allows them to actually get the oxygen out of the water so they can breathe. Now, what else do we see on this Garibaldi? There's something covering its whole body, actually. What's this stuff here? What do we think? So that is actually its scales. So what do we think scales could do for a fish? How could that help it? Well, scales kind of do the same job for a fish as our skin does for us. So what does our skin do for us? Well, let's see. If I were to, let's roll around in a big puddle of mud, I have skin on my body, so it's not going directly into my body, and I'm not getting all those germs in my body. So skin, in that way, protects us. It protects us from germs, bacteria, all kinds of things we don't want in our body. Same thing with scales. They offer fish protection. And then, let's see what else. How is our fish going to swim around? That's a pretty important part of being a fish, isn't it? Swimming around. So what body part is it going to use to do that swimming? Yeah. This fish looks way different, doesn't it? You can see right here, and here, and here, and here. It has fins. So fins help it move around. Now, all these things we described, gills, scales, and fins, those are all adaptations. An adaptation is just anything that an animal has on its body that helps it survive. So thinking about gills, that, as we said, helps it breathe. That is something that it needs to survive. I know I need to breathe to survive. And then we talked about how scales protect fish from germs. And obviously, being protected is a great way to survive. But, thank you so much, Sophie. How is moving something that helps an animal survive? Well, let's think about that as we watch all of these beautiful tropical fish swim around. So, all these fish are swimming around this coral reef right now. Now, if they saw a larger fish that might want to eat them, do you think they would want to stay in one place, or do you think they might want to get out of there? Yeah, most of these fish would probably start to swim away and maybe find somewhere to hide. So in that way, moving helps them survive. They move away from danger. Now, let's say there's no predator around right now, but they're feeling pretty hungry. Now, we all have to eat to survive, just like and fish do as well. Do you think these fish are going to be able to find food if they stay perfectly still? Well, there's some animals that could. I think I see an anemone or an urchin. That's one animal that can stay still and still grab its food. But that's not the case for fish, just like it's not the case for us. Fish and us, we have to move around to go get our food. If I want to have a piece of cake, I have to stand up, I have to walk to the fridge, and I have to get it. Same way, these fish, if it wants to eat something, it has to swim around and find that food. So moving is a really important part of surviving, both staying away from danger, getting food, and then for some animals, depending on how social they are, it can be a part of connecting with other animals. So you might see some fish schooling, especially one example I can think of is sardines in our blue cavern. Those are fish you might find in a kelp forest. And schooling is something they all do together. And again, that just helps them survive. It makes them look like a bigger fish and makes them a little bit scarier for other predators. So we've talked about fins, there they are, those cute little sardines. And just like I said, they are swimming together. Right here, they're kind of all going in different directions, but if they were schooling, they'd all be moving in one direction. So, as I mentioned, fins are a really important adaptation. They help the fish move, and moving is essential to surviving. But now I'm going to ask you to make another observation. What I'd like you to do is look at all these fish. We have so many different kinds here. That's one of the cool things about a coral reef. But I want you to look at them and ask yourself, are all of their fins the same? Are some of the fins shaped differently? Yeah, you might have noticed that, well, each individual fish, it has different kinds of fins. And then those fish, their fins don't look exactly like the other kinds of fish. So let's see. Oh, perfect. So this is a butterfly fish. So we can see it has these triangle shaped fins up here, one down here. And then this one is also kind of like a triangle. So similar shapes, but they're all in different positions, right? But that was a little different from the Garibaldi we were looking at earlier. I know one big difference. This tail is shaped a lot like a triangle. The Garibaldi's tail is that heart shape. So let's try and think about why they might have different positions for their fins. How could these different positions affect how they use those fins? Well, when I want to talk about fish fins and the different jobs they do, I like to talk about sharks. That's actually something I brought up earlier, forgot about. We were going to figure out if sharks actually are fish. They do have gills. They have scales. They're a little unique. And they have fins, but they definitely have all those things that make a fish. So if we have somewhere some kind of footage of a shark swimming, that is a great way to look at how they use their different fins. And in the meantime, while we're seeing if we can pull that up, I'm going to bring out my shark friend. So, like we compared before, do these fins look a lot like the fins we see on this fish here? They're pretty different, right? So, let's see, what do we notice about these fins? Well, we have one on top here. We have a tinier one here as well on top. Then we have the tail again. And on bottom we have two. Oh, one tiny fin. The other one is a hand. It's for me to put my hand in. It is a puppet friend. And then we have some fins on the side. All right, so we are going to watch this shark move around. And what I'd like you to do is, as we're watching it, ask yourself, what part of the shark's body is moving the most? Thank you. Sophie's going to loop that for us so we can keep watching this over and over again. So what part of its body is moving the most? So for this shark, I would say the part that's moving the most would be its tail. So for the shark, its tail moves the most. The sharks, they use their tail kind of like an engine. That is what pushes them through the water, that powers them forward. And it's true for all sharks. We were before looking at a thresher shark, I believe, and we have a leopard shark right here. And then if it were to try to change directions, what fin do you think would be best for that? So it has two directions to go in. Same way, if I'm standing right here, I could either go right or left. So let's see, is there anyone when it has two? Ooh, this is a great example. Two on each side. What do you think? Yeah, those two in the front, these front fins are called pectoral fins. And, I mentioned earlier how each fish has a different fin positions, different shapes, but the names are generally the same. So if they're in the front, they would be called pectoral fins. If they're a tail, we call them a caudal fin. I usually just call them a tail. But for the shark, that is what's going to help them change direction. And then we have that one on top left as well as some on the bottom. What do we think those could be used for? Well, it can move forward. It can change direction. It's doesn't really look like it'd be super helpful for going up or down. In fact, sharks tend to use their head to kind of guide that motion. Well, I'm actually going to make a little drawing to explain this, the job of that fin. So sharks are kind of shaped like this, where they're pointy at each end. They have a pointy face, pointy little tip that leads to their tail. But looking at this shape, does that remind you of anything? To me, it kind of reminds me of a lemon. How I might draw an eye. It might also remind you of a football. Now, if you were to throw a football correctly, not the way I throw it, but the way the real football players throw it, would it just go through their air straight, or would it spin and spiral? The way they throw it, it spirals, right? So, what that means for a shark is that if it didn't have this fin at the top and some of these ones at the bottom, it just had fins on the side and its tail, there'd be nothing to keep it from spiraling. Because that's what those fins do. They help it balance and not spiral around as they swim. So that's why we want to make sure our shark has that fin up top that we call its dorsal fin. Might have one there and one there. So that way our shark can be a great swimmer and get everywhere it needs to go. So again, sharks are just one kind of fish. But this is just to show you that each fish has different ways of using their fins. So now that we've looked at a shark, let's go back to that butterfly fish. And maybe we can look at some other small tropical fish swimming around. Ooh, this is a great example. So we see here it has a fin on top, dorsal fin, just the same as the shark. And as with the shark, it has a similar job. It helps the fish balance. We have this fish fin on the bottom. We actually call that the anal fin. We have some tiny anal fins on our shark that we added, but that kind of just adds to that job of balancing. And then we have the tail, or like I said, we can call that the caudal fin, or we could just call it the tail. But a big difference is how they use these pectoral fins. So we mentioned our shark friend uses them to change direction. Well, our blue tang friend over here has got a few different things to do. It lives a little differently than the shark. So we saw that shark earlier. It was swimming, it's almost kind of gliding around. It's just cruising around, looking for its food. When it sees it, it'll get really fast and go to it. And then once it's done, it'll keep cruising again. But this blue tang has to make a few more precise movements. So it lives in a coral reef, which is a little tiny and cramped, more so than that thresher shark who had the whole open ocean, lots of wide space that we saw there. So it needs to be able to get into the nooks and crannies created by the coral, and it's usually going to find things like its food there. So it might want to duck in to some coral and get back out, and then go into some more coral and back out. And then if it thinks of predators nearby, it might want to hide in some coral for a while. So it's got to do a lot of back and forth motion and a lot of precise changing of the angle it's swimming at. So those fins, unlike the shark who mainly uses its tail, it actually mainly uses its pectoral fins to do all those slight different movements in and out of the coral, around other fish. So that is just one example of two fish having very different uses for their fins. Now let's take a look at some of these animals here. So we are back in a coral reef. This is our tropical exhibit. And like I said, we have a lot of fish like the tang that use their pectoral fins to move around. Oh, we can see this one here. I think that is a surgeon fish that just swam by us. Then we could also see a zebra shark a little bit ago. So what else do we notice about how some of our fish move? I noticed there a lot of them seem to be going to one direction right now. I think they might be getting food. So here at the aquarium, we have a few different ways of feeding our animals. Sometimes we'll do a scatter feed. We'll just throw the water out there, or the food out in the water. Sometimes we'll do a target feed. especially for animals that are a little bit bigger, like our sharks. We'll train them to go to a target for their food, and if they don't see that target, it's not time to eat. There's actually one animal I was hoping we'd see here. We do have some rays, and I wanted to see if they pop up because they have a fairly unique way of swimming. But if they don't, Sophie, I think we have footage of a manta ray on our Mac. So we're going to see how it swims. We're going to see how its body is a little bit different too. Again, like we said, there are similarities between the fins that we see from fish to fish, but some fish don't have any of, let's say, an anal fin or a dorsal fin. So we'll see what this looks like. All right, so let's check out our manta ray. So I'm just going to let you observe this for a little bit, and then we'll talk about what we notice. So what fins do you notice on its body? Well, I definitely see this one here, and this one here, and I see a tiny one right here. So we definitely have those 3 fins right there. Not as many as we saw in our shark or our butterfly fish. And as I'm looking at these rays, they're so unique. I'm sure some of you watched them and said, "Is this even a fish?" Well, it is indeed a fish. It has those fins, as we just pointed out. We can see, I think this is going to swim by us and show that underneath on its body, it has some gills. Oh, you can see those lines right there. Those are its gills. And then if you ever get a chance to touch a ray, you'll notice it's very smooth. But, well, that smoothness is just a layer of mucus that helps protect it. Underneath it does have scales. Much like the shark, they're very unique scales, not like other fish you'll see. But again, they have fins, gills, and scales, so they are fish. So we've looked at the kinds of fins it has. It has 2 pectoral ones on the side. Those are very large. And then it has this tiny little dorsal fin right before its tail. Well, how is it using those fins? Let's take another second to observe that. If you haven't already focused on that, how is it using them? Yeah, well, it's kind of just flapping its pectoral fins. It almost looks like a bird. So that is how many of our rays will swim around. They'll use their huge pectoral fins and just use that to move themselves through the water. Are they moving really fast in this footage? Not particularly, right? So these are manta rays, and their pectoral fins are pretty large. They're almost, again, like a triangle shape. We have some other rays. I don't think we have footage of them swimming, but like our round ray, for example, where it almost looks like it's filling up its fins. They don't almost even look like they're fins, but they do use it the same way. So that is one example of how a fish will uniquely use its fins to move around. I think Sophie's trying to figure out if we have footage of a round ray swimming. Oh, we have a blue spotted. Oh, perfect. So this is not that round ray, but it has a very similar body shape where its pectoral fins are just kind of rounded. It almost looks like a circle that you just stuck a tail onto. And this is it in the middle of swimming. So as you can see, it kind of furls it up to pull itself forward basically through the water. And then a lot of them will even kind of use their face area to, and those fins to push themselves under sand to protect themselves. So that's another use they have for their fins. And yeah, they'll use that to similar motion where it's like a whirling motion, and they'll kick that sand up onto their body to help them hide. So that's what very one sorry about that, folks. One very unique fish. Another unique fish I was hoping to look at would be an eel. I think we have footage of some eels in sand. I wanted to look at how they move, or rather, maybe they don't move as much. Ooh, excellent. So this is an eel. Well, what do we notice about its body? Does it have all those fins we were talking about before? No, it almost looks like it doesn't have any fins at all. So just like I was saying, not all fish are going to have all kinds of fins. So it's hard to tell in this because they are so tiny. But these rays, they have a one long dorsal fin on the top of their body. They also have a long anal fin on the bottom of their body. And they have a very tiny little uh, um, caudal fin on the back. And I think some will have some near their face a little bit to help them move around. Pectoral. So are these eels moving around a lot? Not really. And they're certainly not moving like that butterfly fish was, that the shark was. So these eels are basically just sticking in place in the sand. They're trying to catch some food. So a lot of eels, the way they swim, if they do swim a lot, will almost look kind of like how a snake moves around. But a lot of eels also stay still for a lot of the day. These ones here, as we mentioned, the way they get food is just by sticking in the sand and catching it. There are some eels that will spend most of the day wrapped up in kelp, hiding and just resting. Ooh, this is exactly what I was thinking of. So this eel will just hide in the kelp forest, and it might start hunting around at night, but for the most part, it's going to stay still, hiding in the kelp or among some rocks. Excellent. We have a little bit of time left, and there is one more fish I wanted to look at because it, again, has a very unique way of swimming. Sophie, I think on the Mac I have a clip of a seahorse swimming. So let's take a look at the seahorse and see what we notice about its fins and how it uses them. Ooh, so this is a sea dragon, very similar. So, looking at this, do we see all those fins we talked about? Do we see a dorsal and an anal fin? Oh, let's take a look. Sea dragons are slightly different. They're kind of hard to make out all the fins because they do such a good job of looking like kelp. All right, so this is that seahorse I want to look at. So what do you notice about the fins on its body? Well, it has one right here, right on its back. Then what else do we have? Does it have any other fins? It might be hard to see in this footage. You can see in some angles, but it has two right next to its face. And then is it using them to move a lot? Well, it's using that one on its back to kind of move forward and back. But how's it going up and down? So it has that tail-like structure there. You see in the bottom, it helps it move up and down and kind of push itself forward. But that's not really a fin like we were talking about earlier, was it? So it actually has that one in the back that we were talking about. That is its dorsal fin. And then we've talked a lot about pectoral fins being kind of the front, almost like where you imagine an arm would be, right? Well, what if I told you that fin near its face is actually its pectoral fin? So seahorses, like I said, they are very uniquely structured animals, and they use that unique structure to help them move around. And then again, this kind of tail-like structure here, it's not really fin, but it does help them move around. It propels them forward. I think we can see it here, almost using it to push off of the glass and move itself toward those plants in the back. And this is the way it's going to move is not too dissimilar from the butterfly fish we were looking at earlier. So it's going to make these very tiny, precise movements. Just like the butterfly fish, it lives in a kind of small environment where it has to go into teeny nooks and crannies to get its food. And, you know, another hint we get that it moves similarly is that it has similar mouths. So they're going to look for the same kind of food. So for that, they might have to make similar kinds of movements. All right, my friends, thank you for joining us today. We talked about what makes a fish a fish. They have gills, they have scales, and they have fins. We also talked about how all fins have their different jobs, whether it's a dorsal fin on the back to help balance, an anal fin that also balances, a caudal or a tail that helps move you forward, or some pectoral fins. And we talked about how all fish have a different arrangement of these fins and use them differently depending on where they live, what food they're looking for, or how they need to camouflage. So I want to thank you again for joining us. I hope you join us again. We do this every week, and I hope you keep exploring. Have a good day.